today that the Braves and Mets are going to be playing for first place in the National League East, and I haven't even gotten to that. Braves won last night against the Mets, beating Jacob DeGrom, who hadn't lost all year long, and that put him in first place, first time in 4 years. There was one time when finishing in first place at North Wilkesboro was as big as anything in the NASCAR circuit. But after the 1996 season, when Bob Bear and Bruton Smith bought into the track and then moved the Cup races, then Winston Cup, from North Wilkesboro, traditional NASCAR country, to New Hampshire and Fort Worth, the track was left to go to rot with an exception of 2010. Stephen B. Wilson, who is the public relations, he's the co-founder of Save the Speedway. You'll find it on Facebook. He's also the webmaster and public relations director of the organization, wishes to make North Wilkesboro great again. We talked to him a little bit yesterday, but I want to have him back on so he can have this recorded and we can promote the interview and all this. He felt that when the track was purchased by Bear and Smith back in 95 for those owners right there, that to move races to other tracks, it became difficult to maintain the track. He has been appreciative of Bruton Smith, who now owns, you can get on or fill me in on this, but for keeping up the track for many years, paying the taxes and such, but it just isn't what it once was. And anyway, let me just ask you this. You were talking about bringing back the track and refurbishing it. The last that I've seen, anybody that drives by it on 421, it looks sad. I mentioned this. The old weathered billboards, the banners on the side of the track that have gone, to the weather, and they're all torn up and all this. We've seen the pictures inside of, say stands that are disassembled or boxes to the press box. It's all a mess or whatever. What needs to be done so that there can be races run at North Wilkesboro Speedway again? Stephen B. Wilson.
Really, I think a lot of it is just really kind of dependent and codependent on what kind of activities that you decide or we or others would decide to actually put in there. The track surface has been raced on as early as 2011. In 2009, 2010, also there was lots of different testing there from various different NASCAR organizations, including several different NASCAR champions. The surface of the track itself is not as bad as one would think. In fact, the surface is no older, or maybe about a year or so older than what Atlanta is, and they've been racing on that for 21 different racing seasons, including some of them twice a year. They patched the track up. The grandstands there, a lot of people like to talk about the grandstands. The grandstands, for example, the superstructures from turn one all the way around the backstretch, they're actually built to modern day specifics. And they're 20-year grandstands, and what that means is that every 20 years or so after the original construction, they have to be checked, the footers, the bolts, nuts, things like that. But they're designed for long-term usage. The press boxes, some on the front, some on the back, most specifically the ones on the back, they're almost brand new. They were built for the 95 racing season. The ones on the front have been built over, 20 or 30 years prior to that. There are some on the front stretch that do need to be taken down because, they've had water leakage and things like that over the years. And I'm sure that a lot of people, when they see the pictures, they see the worst of the worst, which is the old Holly Tyson's Farm, the suites that were there in turn 4. Mm-hmm. Those suites were actually hit by a storm in 1997, and it caused a fire behind them. And they've been continuously falling in on themselves ever since. So those actually need to come down. The other things that need to be done in the track, there are some updates that need to be done. The scoring board needs to be updated. There needs to be some refinishing in the garage areas. There needs to be some, obviously, needs to get some of the updated interiors done, cleaned up, and a lot of it is superficial with painting, cleanup of old trees and things like that have grown around the track. But in 2009, there was about $1 million put into the racetrack that got it back into operation. And that's really, got it back to the basic level of operations. As you're talking a $1 to $3 million investment, but if you're looking to exceed beyond your basic local regional racing and multi-purpose facility, then if you're looking for NASCAR to come back, there would be obviously a pretty costly investment for safer barriers, which is about $550 per linear foot. And the last time that we spoke with somebody, there needs to be approximately 950 linear feet installed on the exterior of the racetrack, and that's not contingent upon NASCAR or others coming in and saying that there's other areas of the track, like the interior, for example, that may need to be covered.
Now, you mentioned yesterday that you did not think that even if, the track is restored to its past greatness, it was feasible for cup races to be run there again because the schedules are made 5 years ahead of time and such. Maybe, just maybe, if 10 years from now or, 7 years, just depending on what the schedules would be, the agreements that will take place in the next few years and all this. I think 2020 is when you said NASCAR would have another 5-year agreement on what track gets where, that sort of thing. But if the track was restored, what would be run there? You've mentioned all sorts of things like concerts and all this, but I think people, they want to see races. What kind of races right now, short-term best case, could you run at North Wilkesboro if it was revitalized?
The Paz Racing Series, which put on one of the richest super late model races at $75,000 to win there in April of 2011, they've continuously expressed interest in returning back to the racetrack. There's also some possibility that other regional racing, such as the Cars Racing Series, can come there, or the Super Stock Car Series. The Super Southern Series, which runs in a majority of southern states, all the way from Florida out to Alabama and up to the Tennessee region. There's a potential to also bring back in modifieds, such as the Wheeling Unified Modifieds or the NASCAR K&N Series, because all these series really just kind of fit into that portfolio of tracks that run on these short regional type racing facilities, 5/8 of a mile, half-mile tracks, quarter, things like that. These are just some examples of local and regional racing that could return there. There's many other series that are out there that fit into this portfolio. Unfortunately, I don't think even after the acquisition of NASCAR, ARCA's acquisition by NASCAR, that they would fit into this profile because unfortunately that was tried down at Rockingham, and about 500 or between 500 and 750 people actually showed up in the grandstands. In fact, there was more people working in the garage than were in the grandstands. So while they have a lot of following in the Midwest, they don't seem to fit into the profile of, running at these tracks like this. So unfortunately, I don't think that they would be a part of this or could be a part of this. Long-term outreach beyond that would be to obviously show that these races could be held and other facility events could be held. And long-term outreach would be to go to something like the NASCAR Champion World Truck Series, in which does have many different dates available because that they spread out. They just came off a 5-week hiatus at this point in the spring, and they don't run anywhere over 5 weeks. So, there's some potential and some opportunities to bring some racing like the NASCAR Champion World Truck Series, but I do think that would be a stretch, and I don't think anything beyond the NASCAR Champion World Truck Series could be supported at a facility like North Wilkesboro Speedway today.
And that's today, and that's in the future, too. So how much is that actually holding you back from revitalizing or getting donations and all this? Because I think I remember, when North Wilkesboro was on the circuit, now especially, that's the moonshine track, that sort of thing. And that you're saying, well, best case scenario, maybe we'll have truck races back again. That's okay. We can, revitalize this great old ballpark, but we'll have Little League games there again. Maybe that's not the best analogy in the world, but you get what I'm saying. It wouldn't be the highest level. How much is that holding you back in your endeavors?
I think everybody has to be realistic into this, and we always run across the unrealistic of, well, I'm not really interested, or, people don't seem to be interested unless they hear Monster Energy NASCAR Cup Series. And, while that sometimes can be a fair assessment into this, there are a lot of people that are interested, and we're seeing a resurgence in short track racing across the country.
Yeah.
In these local and regional type races, racing series. The Cars Racing Series, the Pass Racing Series, even the Wheeling Unified Modifieds, when they come to various different tracks, not only when they run in the Northeast, but they come down south to Canyon Series. A lot of these series are seeing a resurgence in people coming to these events versus some larger scale events. And while the Camping World Truck Series is, ultimately the best case scenario for this, it does kind of hinder it in one way because, you're not setting your sights for the biggest and best that NASCAR has to offer. But the Camping World Truck Series arguably probably has some of the most competitive racing. And while they have seen a downturn in some areas, they're seeing growth in other areas. And those growth seems to be in these 1 mile and under racetracks. And I think that, it's just about convincing the people that this is good for it's good for the track, because really anything that can be done there is going to be good for the racetrack. The economy, the infrastructure, all these types of things you can fall right into line with these, once you can build upon, smaller events.
Well, Stephen B. Wilson saved the Speedway yesterday. You told us things I didn't know. For instance, although there haven't been any races run there, you told us now 2011. I thought it was 2010. Forgive me. But, commercials for Husqvarna you mentioned. American Aquarium did a music video there. So there have been some things that have been going on. But I do want to ask this. When you do drive by the place, it just looks sad. Why couldn't Save the Speedway, for instance, I don't know, make a deal for that billboard that still says Winston Cup Series and just have, Save the Speedway to get more cause to be the billboard there, or cut down those old banners on the side, you know what I'm talking about, that are so weathered and worn and torn, and it just makes it look like it's saying, hey, bring the wrecking ball on. This is an eyesore, that sort of thing. Why can't something be done about that?
Well, the old Winston Cup sign that put there many years ago, we actually did some research into that sign in Winston, and R.J. Reynolds actually owned that sign. In fact, because of their agreement with NASCAR, the tracks, and personal service agreements, they owned that sign that you're talking about. In recent years, they've relinquished that ownership back to basically the property owner, which it actually sits on the track property. It would need to go through various different permitting and things like that would be required to take it down, plus the permission of obviously the track owner. And same thing needs to occur with those banners out there. Anything that is done inside of the track, or potentially could be done inside the track, at this point would have to be given permission from the property owner and the track owner itself. They've seen in here recently and in the last couple of years that they're more willing to keep the facility in some kind of functional state. And hopefully, we're hoping that, that will progress into a point where some of these things could be done, where somebody could get in there and start cutting some of this old overgrowth under the superstructure, or take these old banners down that weren't taken down in 2011 when the Leeds group got out there. So, these things are, a progressive state, and, without permission, it's hard to get some of these things done. And we're hoping that as, they continue to keep this, as they can keep it operating in some state, that they'll continue to make, minimal improvements, or, maybe be willing to have some others come in and make those minimal improvements. At least for
I mean, I can understand the billboard a little bit with the Winston Cup Series because that almost looks like a historical, marker. If you follow what I'm saying, I can kind of understand that. But man, the banner that leads me to those. You mentioned this yesterday, but who is currently the owner of the track right now?
SMI out of Charlotte currently owns the track. They got 100% control of the ownership of the track when they purchased New Hampshire Motor Speedway in 2008, 2009. I can't remember the specific year, but prior to that, there was a 50% ownership in between, the New Hampshire owner and SMI corporate entity. So today, it's 100% wholly owned by SMI out of Charlotte.
SMI out of Charlotte, okay. And why have they not expressed any greater interest in doing things with the track than the occasional commercial video in recent years?
Well, you gotta remember that until 2008, 2009, until they got 100% ownership in the track, Bryn Smith and everybody down there, they were paying the taxes. They were until continuing today, make sure that the caretaker is taken care of. These are all things that they've done on their own outside of even the previous 50-50 ownership into the track. Unfortunately, by the time it got to that point in 2008, 2009, when they had 100% controlling ownership, they were just really seems to be like little agreement on, what could be done there. Bryn Smith said that, he didn't own 100% of the track, so he didn't have 100% of say what he could do at the track. So today it's just fell into that state of disrepair over that time, in which case that, they moved on and they have a business that they have to run, and their business is in a race car and multi-purpose operations. And up until, like I said, about 8-9 years ago, it really wasn't totally up to them on what they could do. And since then, they like any business, have had to move on, and now they've started to slowly find other ways to use the facility as people are starting to express interest in the facility. They have finally, after all of these years, that we did see them lease the facility out for a limited amount of time. Unfortunately, it wasn't SMI's fault that they closed up and had to shut that operation down. I think in the future, or even today, that they'd be still willing to do things like that. And it's just about finding the right combination of, business and opportunity for them going forward.
Well, I guess the thing that I look at it, and you mentioned this yesterday, how you had a historical marker for the track placed up, and we spoke of this. But the historical marker is off the Speedway Drive exit. It's, not seen by people driving on 421, certainly. It's a mile away from the track, and you said, well, SMI, the owners, they didn't want that historical marker on the track property. And I just was sort of scratching my head. Why wouldn't they? Did they give you any reason? I mean, that seems to me to be a flashing red light of saying, well, we like that you're a history buff and all that, but we're not all that interested. That's just it. Why did they tell you put this a mile away, the historical marker a mile away from the track, rather than by the track? What was the reason given?
Well, they didn't tell us that we had to put it a mile away from the track. And when this thing was actually approved, and there's quite a lengthy approval process that this goes through for these historical markers and these historical designations in the state of North Carolina, when it was approved, that was still at a period in about 2008 or so when SMI didn't own 100% of the racetrack. So they didn't have 100%. Again, it came back to the fact that they didn't have 100% say into it being placed there. So while it was in flux, and because it had been approved, the state of North Carolina then defaults back to the North Carolina Department of Transportation and their right-of-way for research on where this can be placed at. So it had to be placed in a most visible spot near or at the facility in which the Department of Transportation had a right-of-way, and that was, unfortunately, that was the closest right-of-way that they had. But, you know, it is still on Speedway Road. It is still right on the exit that leads to the track, and it is in a highly visible spot. So, you know, these are all the things that they look for when they place these markers, and sometimes markers are just not placed at right on the facility property or right on the historical property that they're putting this information on. So, you know, it does reflect that in the casting of it. And, you know, in the future, if it could be moved, it could maybe be moved, but it is a quite costly endeavor.
How much money is it going to take to refurbish this the way it needs to be a viable, functioning track again? How much money are we looking at?
I mean, you're looking at a $1 to $3 million investment into the renovations of the track, and that's provided that, you know, you're paying market costs for materials and labor. It also depends on how far you wish to take your renovations to. That $1 to $3 million estimate is based solely on the fact of the minimums needed to run this facility as a regional and local racing facility. To hold multi-purpose events such as concerts, such as trade shows, such as car shows, and various other events. And if you wish to proceed or go beyond that, then yes, it could become a quite costly endeavor. It can run up in the $7 to $12 to even $15 million range if somebody is going to look at the fact that they want to put safer barriers, if they want to do major reconstructions into the Speedway, then yes, it could become quite costly. But, you know, to save the facility, to get the facility back, you know, there are costs involved in either a lease or a sale. Both of those could potentially be negotiated. But beyond that, it will be in the $1 to $3 million range, just as back in 2009, because some of the things that the county and state have actually wanted done were already completed. There is water sitting outside of the track in 421. There's been a concern of the sewer, which was a concern in 1996 when the track closed, even in 1995, and there was plans in place to actually fix the sewer there. The county has allowed pump and haul permits in the past, and they've indicated that they could potentially do this into the future should be there a viable business opportunity there at the racetrack while they extend the sewer, which is not but so far down Speedway Road. And there are potential money sources through the State Commerce Department and other different infrastructure grants in the state of North Carolina for job creation that could move this project along for getting sewer into that facility. So, you know, these are all things that have been thought about and capitalized on potentially. And if somebody is willing to come in there and put the work in, then, you know, you could definitely make this a very viable facility for $1 to $3 million.
Well, hey, not only did Richard Petty win there, but Chase Elliott won a race at the North Wilkesboro Speedway. You want to talk about it's not so contemporary? There you go. When they started having racing again there at the start of the decade. Stephen B. Wilson, one of the co-founders of Save the Speedway. Look for it online. Go there on Facebook. Hey, if you want to find out how to get involved, that's your key. I'm right against a break. When we come back, Caleb Calhoun talking about the Beverly Davenport firing on Tri-City Sports Now. I